It started with a scream that wasn't mine but might as well have been. Mrs. Callahan, the sweet grandmother down the street, had just plugged in her Christmas lights and watched them glow for a glorious 10 seconds before her entire yard went black. The lights flickered once, then died like a candle snuffed out by a cruel hand. Standing in her driveway, she let out a shriek that carried down the block. The reason wasn't electrical failure, though that would have been bad enough. No, the reason was worse, infinitely worse. An official letter had been taped to her door while she was inside baking gingerbread cookies. It was bold, stamped with the HOA's seal, and it read, "Effective immediately. The display of all outdoor holiday lighting is strictly prohibited. Violators will be fined $500 per incident." $500 per incident. A lump formed in my throat because I knew then and there Christmas on Maplewood Drive was about to become a war zone. I had always thought our neighborhood was normal, a mix of retirees with suspiciously perfect lawns, young families with minivans, and a handful of singles like me who mostly tried to keep to ourselves. We waved, we borrowed sugar, we fought passive-aggressive battles over trash cans left too long at the curb. But no one ever expected the HOA to take a wrecking ball to the very thing that made December tolerable. The lights. The twinkle, the glow, the sense of something magical. I wasn't even a hardcore decorator. My idea of festive was a strand of colored bulbs across the porch and maybe an inflatable snowman if I felt ambitious. Still, hearing that lights were banned felt like someone had outlawed laughter itself. The letter claimed it was about safety. The wording was flowery and vague, talking about potential fire hazards, electrical overload, and visual disruptions that might cause accidents. But everyone knew it wasn't about safety. It was about control. Specifically, it was about one man, Gerald Thompson, the HOA president. If Satan ever retired, Gerald would have been his top pick as successor. He was tall, always wore shirts tucked into his pants with the kind of belt that screamed midlife crisis, and his smile never touched his eyes. Gerald was a man who didn't believe in joy unless it was his own, and unfortunately, joy didn't fit into his rigid blueprint of how Maplewood Drive should look. That night, I walked over to my mailbox and found my own letter. The paper was thick, self-important, the kind that wanted you to know it was serious. I read it once, then again, then out loud to my cat, who hissed at it as though even she understood tyranny. My first instinct was to laugh. I mean, how ridiculous could you get? Banning Christmas lights in a suburban neighborhood was like banning sunscreen in Florida. But the laughter stuck in my throat when I saw Mrs. Callahan sitting on her porch, shoulders slumped, staring at her now dark shrubs. She looked smaller somehow, as if one silly piece of paper had stolen something bigger than bulbs and wires. It had stolen a piece of spirit. The next day, the board called a meeting. Gerald presided like a dictator standing on a balcony. We gathered in the community hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air heavy with resentment. He cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement that droned on about property values, aesthetic harmony, and how Maplewood Drive must remain a neighborhood of dignity. Dignity, as though a string of candy cane lights was an affront to human civilization. My fists clenched under the table. Around me, neighbors muttered, some nodding in weary acceptance, others shaking their heads in outrage. A few dared to raise objections, but Gerald silenced them with icy logic and the constant reminder of fines. By the time the meeting adjourned, the atmosphere was poisonous. I left with fire in my chest. Something about the smugness in Gerald's voice, the way he savored the word prohibited, lit a fuse in me. I wasn't the kind to start fights, but I was definitely the kind to finish them once provoked. And this was provocation. Walking home, I imagined Maplewood Drive swallowed in darkness, houses stripped of cheer, kids asking their parents why Santa skipped our street. The thought twisted my stomach. If we gave in now, what would be next? No Halloween pumpkins? No birthday balloons? No freedom at all? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Somebody had to stand up, and if no one else would, it might as well be me. That evening, I called a few friends from the neighborhood. At first, the reactions were cautious. People were scared of the fines. Some shrugged and said it was only lights, that it wasn't worth fighting over. But then Mrs. Callahan's daughter spoke up. Her voice trembled as she described how her kids had burst into tears when they learned their beloved reindeer display couldn't go up this year. The silence that followed was thick. I could hear people shifting uncomfortably on the other end of the line. And slowly, one by one, voices agreed. It wasn't about lights anymore. It was about principle. It was about not letting one bitter man hold a whole community hostage. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining what defiance would look like. A single strand of lights across my roof? Too small. A wreath glowing in the window? Too easy to ignore. No, if I was going to push back, it had to be bold. It had to be the kind of thing Gerald would choke on when he saw it. I pictured synchronized displays, houses blinking in unison, a rebellion of lights that couldn't be silenced. The idea electrified me, pun fully intended. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I sat up, grabbed a notebook, and started scribbling plans. By sunrise, I had a sketch that looked more like a battle map than holiday decorations. Arrows marked where extension cords would go, stars indicated rooftops for inflatable Santas, and circles showed where spotlights could shine against garage doors. It was messy, chaotic, and probably insane, but it was a start. My cat, perched on the dresser, flicked her tail as though approving my madness. I grinned, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just Christmas anymore. This was war. But wars need allies. The next day, I went door to door, a clipboard in hand, channeling the spirit of a political campaigner. Some slammed the door, fearful of retribution. Others whispered their support, eyes darting nervously. And then there were the bold ones, like Danny, the high schooler with too much energy and a love of electronics, who immediately offered to build custom circuits for the cause. Or the Johnsons, who owned a landscaping business and promised access to enough ladders to outfit the whole block. Piece by piece, the resistance took shape. Of course, Gerald caught wind of the murmurs. That man had spies everywhere, like squirrels trained to report on acorn theft. I received my first warning letter within 2 days, claiming I had been observed, conspiring to undermine the integrity of the community. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Integrity, my foot. If integrity meant crushing joy, I wanted none of it. But the warning made one thing clear: we were being watched. And if we were going to pull this off, we'd have to be clever. Very clever. On the third night, as I sat with my notebook and a mug of cocoa, the sound of carols drifted faintly through the air. Someone, somewhere, was daring to play music. I stepped outside, heart pounding, and saw a glow flicker 2 houses down. A single reindeer, its head bobbing mechanically, shone against the darkness. My chest tightened with pride. It was small, yes, but it was defiance. It was the first spark. And I knew, without a doubt, it wouldn't be the last. The reindeer was the first shot fired in what quickly became known, at least in my head, as the War of the Wreaths. Gerald must have seen it too, because by morning the poor glowing creature was gone. One moment it stood proudly on the neighbor's lawn. The next it had vanished, replaced by a sign stuck into the grass that read citation issued. The sign had the HOA seal, and beneath it in smaller print, a fine for $500. $500 for one reindeer with a plastic nose that blinked on and off. The neighbor, a mild man named Frank, shuffled outside in his slippers, stared at the empty spot where his reindeer had been, and muttered a string of words I had never heard from him before. His wife tried to console him with coffee, but the damage was done. Gerald had drawn blood. Word spread fast. By noon, the whole block was buzzing about the abduction. Theories flew. Some swore Gerald had snuck out at dawn and personally yanked the reindeer from the ground. Others said he kept an army of volunteers on speed dial, ready to erase any sparkle of rebellion before it gained traction. A few whispered darker rumors that Gerald had a storage unit filled with confiscated holiday decorations, a graveyard of Santas and snowflakes gathering dust in the dark. Whatever the truth, the effect was chilling. Some neighbors began unplugging their indoor lights, terrified Gerald might peer through their windows. But for me, the disappearance only hardened my resolve. That night, I decided subtlety was dead. If Gerald wanted to play dirty, then dirty he would get. I strung a single strand of rainbow lights across my porch, plugged them in, and waited. They glowed defiantly against the dark street. Minutes passed. 10. 20. I half expected a van to screech up and men in black uniforms to descend on me. Instead, nothing happened. I sipped cocoa on my porch swing and enjoyed the show. Then, just before midnight, a car slowed in front of my house. The window rolled down. A hand stuck out holding a flashlight, scanning. I stood, heart hammering, ready to confront whoever it was. But the car pulled away without stopping. Still, I knew exactly whose eyes were behind that flashlight. The next morning, my letter arrived. This one wasn't even pretending to be polite. It accused me of willful disregard for community guidelines and warned that if I did not remove my lights within 24 hours, the fine would be applied automatically. Automatically. As though Gerald had some magical button he could press to vacuum money straight out of my bank account. I crumpled the letter and tossed it at the recycling bin, where it bounced off the rim and landed on the floor like a rejected basketball shot. My cat pounced on it, shredding the corner with her claws. I took that as a sign of encouragement. But Gerald was relentless. That afternoon, Danny the high schooler stopped by my place. His backpack bulged suspiciously, wires and batteries poking out of the top. He grinned like a mad scientist. He had a plan, he said. If Gerald wanted to fine us for lights, then we'd give him something worth fining. Danny sketched diagrams across my kitchen table, explaining circuits that could make entire blocks flash in synchronized patterns. My head spun, not just from his enthusiasm but from the sheer audacity of it. This wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was art. We set to work that evening. Danny roped in his friends from robotics club, and soon my garage looked like a secret laboratory. Extension cords coiled like snakes, soldering irons hissed, and laptops hummed with programming code. We laughed more than we should have, the kind of laughter that comes when you know you're one step away from disaster but too excited to care. Meanwhile, neighbors tiptoed in and out, delivering supplies. The Johnsons dropped off ladders and toolboxes. Mrs. Callahan brought trays of cookies for morale. It felt less like a neighborhood under siege and more like a ragtag army preparing for battle. The retaliation came quicker than we expected. 2 days later, someone cut the wires of the glowing wreath on the Perez family's front door. Just sliced it clean, leaving the wreath dangling lifeless against the wood. Mr. Perez stormed out into the night, shouting curses at the sky. He swore he saw a figure in a hoodie sprinting away, but no one else caught the culprit. Of course, everyone knew who was behind it. Gerald's fingerprints might not have been literal, but they were all over the crime. Fear seeped deeper into the block. Every decoration felt like a target. By then, the letters had become absurd. One neighbor received a notice that the reflection of her Christmas tree lights in the front window constituted an outdoor display. Another was told that a snowflake sticker on the garage door violated aesthetic uniformity. I received one for humming jingle bells too loudly on my porch, though I strongly suspect that was Gerald's personal vendetta rather than an official HOA bylaw. Each new letter became less about rules and more about psychological warfare. Gerald wanted us broken, weary, ready to surrender. But instead of breaking us, it bound us tighter together. The turning point came during the weekend block party. Technically, it wasn't a party, more like an impromptu gathering of angry neighbors with mugs of cider and too many grievances to count. People vented, swapping horror stories about the fines, the threats, the surveillance. Laughter bubbled up in between the complaints, dark humor that kept us sane. Someone joked about forming a militia armed with candy canes. Someone else suggested rigging their lawn ornaments with motion sensors to spray intruders with eggnog. The ideas grew wilder, fueled by frustration and spiked cider. But through the laughter, a current of determination flowed. We weren't going to give in. Not now, not ever. That night, the rebellion escalated. Danny unveiled the prototype of his synchronized system. He wired up my porch lights and the Johnsons' roof display to blink in unison. When he flipped the switch, the street came alive. Red, green, blue, gold, all pulsing to the beat of a carol blasted from a Bluetooth speaker. It was mesmerizing, hilarious, and utterly infuriating for anyone who hated joy, which meant Gerald. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a curtain twitch in his living room. He was watching. Oh, he was watching. The next morning, Frank, the man whose reindeer had been confiscated, appeared on his lawn with a grin. He had replaced the missing reindeer with 3 new ones, all glowing brighter than the first. His wife clapped her hands, kids squealed with delight, and neighbors cheered. For one glorious day, Maplewood Drive looked alive again. Lights winked from porches, snowmen inflated proudly, and music floated through the air. We had crossed the line. We were no longer afraid. Of course, Gerald struck back hard. A public notice was posted on every mailbox that night, declaring all violators would be summoned to a special disciplinary hearing. The language was so stiff it read like a courtroom summons. Failure to appear would result in maximum penalties. My stomach dropped as I read it, but then I caught Danny's smirk and the Johnsons' thumbs up from across the street. If Gerald thought dragging us into his little kangaroo court would scare us, he was wrong. It only made us more determined to win. But even as our spirits soared, the tension ratcheted higher. Decorations began disappearing mysteriously. A candy cane fence vanished overnight. An inflatable Santa turned up slashed, deflated on the curb. It wasn't just Gerald anymore. Someone else, or maybe several someones, had joined his cause. Whether they were loyalists or just cowards currying favor, it didn't matter. We were under attack from within. Suspicion spread, paranoia nipping at the edges of our unity. We had to be careful, but we also had to be bold. Because if Gerald wanted a war, then by the time it ended, Maplewood Drive would be remembered for the brightest rebellion of lights the suburbs had ever seen. The summons to the disciplinary hearing felt like something from a dystopian novel. Every violator was commanded to appear in the community hall on Saturday morning at 9 sharp. The letter threatened maximum penalties and even mentioned legal escalation, as if stringing lights was on par with Grand Theft Auto. I read it 3 times, equal parts furious and amused. Gerald wanted this spectacle. He wanted us cornered, humiliated, and most of all, obedient. But obedience was not on the menu. Saturday was about to become the stage for something much bigger than he could control. The morning arrived bitter cold. The community hall buzzed with tension, bodies packed into folding chairs, the air humming with low whispers. Gerald sat at the front like a judge ready to deliver sentences. His tie was bright red, the only splash of color in an otherwise gray figure. Beside him, 2 board members shuffled papers nervously, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. A long table separated them from us, like a courtroom barrier meant to remind us who held the power. I noticed Mrs. Callahan clutching her granddaughter's mittened hand, her jaw tight with quiet fury. Frank sat with his arms crossed, glaring so hard I thought his glasses might crack. My own chest thudded as I took a seat near the front, ready for whatever theater Gerald had in store. He called the meeting to order with a bang of his gavel. Yes, he had a gavel. He always did, even though this was technically a neighborhood board and not the Supreme Court. The sound made a few people jump. He cleared his throat and launched into a monologue about community integrity, the dangers of unchecked rebellion, and the absolute necessity of compliance. He used words like insubordination and escalation, as if we were soldiers who had gone AWOL. Each sentence dripped with condescension. Every few moments he'd glance at me specifically, eyes narrow, as though daring me to interrupt. I didn't. Not yet. The charges were read one by one. Mrs. Perez for displaying a wreath with unauthorized illumination. Frank for multiple reindeer violations. The Johnsons for synchronized roof lights. My name came up with a list so long it sounded almost impressive. Each charge carried a fine. Gerald rattled them off with relish, pausing for dramatic effect before announcing totals. Gasps echoed as numbers climbed into the thousands. Some neighbors paled. Others clenched fists. I felt anger coil hot in my gut, but I forced myself to stay calm, because I had something Gerald didn't know yet. After the charges, he opened the floor for comments. The room exploded. Neighbors shouted, voices rising over one another. Some pleaded for leniency, others raged about injustice. Gerald banged his gavel again and again, trying to silence the chaos. Finally, I stood. My voice cut through the noise not because it was loud but because I had been waiting, calculating, timing the moment. All eyes turned. I laid out what I had discovered in the weeks leading up to this circus. It started innocently. Danny and I had been testing circuits in the alley when we noticed something strange. A faint glow behind Gerald's fence. At first we thought it was a reflection, but then we caught a glimpse of wires snaking along his backyard. Curiosity drove us to investigate further, and what we found made our jaws drop. Gerald, the man banning lights, had strung his own private display in his backyard. Not small either. Dozens of strings twinkled around his trees. A glowing angel perched on his patio. Even a projection system cast snowy patterns across his fence. He had hidden his joy where no one could see, while crushing everyone else's. Hypocrisy so thick you could choke on it. I told the room everything. Gasps rose like a wave. Gerald's face drained of color, then flushed beet red. He shouted objections, called me a liar, accused me of fabricating evidence. But then Frank stood up. He had photos, grainy, taken from his upstairs window, but clear enough to show Gerald's backyard glowing in all its hypocritical glory. Frank held them high. The crowd erupted. Some booed, others laughed, a few shouted traitor. Gerald banged his gavel so hard the handle snapped off. His composure cracked, his voice quivering as he tried to regain control. But the room was no longer his. The drama escalated when one of the board members, a quiet woman named Sheila, cleared her throat and spoke. She admitted she had also seen the lights but had been too intimidated to speak up. Her confession emboldened others. Stories spilled out about Gerald's behind-the-scenes manipulation, how he threatened board members, how he bent rules to suit himself. The more people spoke, the more fragile Gerald looked. His power, built on intimidation and secrecy, was crumbling under the weight of truth. But just when I thought we had him cornered, he struck back. With a venomous smile, he produced a thick folder. Inside were documents, photos, and emails. He waved them like weapons. He claimed they were proof of our conspiracy, evidence that we had plotted against the HOA in ways that endangered the community. He accused us of theft, sabotage, even harassment. He pointed directly at me, calling me the ringleader of a dangerous cabal intent on destroying Maplewood Drive. The audience fell silent. My stomach lurched. For a moment, I felt the weight of fear press down. Could he actually turn this around? That was when Danny spoke. He rose from his chair with the casual confidence only a teenager could muster. He admitted he had hacked into the HOA's email system. Gasps again, this time sharper. Gerald leapt on the admission, shouting about criminal charges. But Danny wasn't finished. He explained what he had found. Financial discrepancies. Misallocated funds. Money that was supposed to go toward community projects quietly redirected into accounts controlled by Gerald. Thousands of dollars missing. The board members stiffened, eyes darting nervously. The audience shifted uneasily. Suddenly, Gerald's accusations seemed less damning compared to outright theft. Danny held up a printed spreadsheet, his voice steady. Every misused dollar was highlighted, every suspicious transfer traced. The silence in the hall was suffocating. Gerald sputtered, denying everything, calling it fabrication. But Sheila reached across the table, grabbed the spreadsheet, and examined it. Her face tightened. She confirmed some of the numbers matched what she had seen but had been forbidden to question. The room erupted again, this time with fury aimed squarely at Gerald. He tried to stand, tried to reassert authority, but the tide had turned. His gavel was gone. His power evaporated. The hearing dissolved into chaos. Some neighbors shouted for his resignation. Others demanded police involvement. Gerald stormed out, his tie flapping, shouting threats of lawsuits. The board members huddled, whispering, clearly shaken. For the first time, we glimpsed the cracks in his armor. The tyrant wasn't invincible. He was just a man, corrupt and scared, scrambling to maintain control. After the meeting, neighbors spilled into the parking lot buzzing with adrenaline. Some laughed, others cried, many hugged. The sense of unity was palpable. We had survived the worst of his intimidation, and we had exposed him. But the war wasn't over. Gerald still held the title of president, and he still had claws. Rumors swirled that he was preparing to retaliate, that he would call in lawyers, that he would stop at nothing to crush us. But for the first time, I felt hope stronger than fear. We had stood up. We had seen the truth. And we weren't backing down. That night, the street glowed brighter than ever. Lights flickered back on. Inflatables rose proudly. Music echoed into the cold air. I stood on my porch, cocoa warming my hands, and watched the rebellion sparkle. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without worry. Because no matter what came next, we had proven one thing. Maplewood Drive wasn't Gerald's kingdom. It was ours. The rebellion had been brewing for weeks, but after the disciplinary hearing exploded, it became inevitable. The neighborhood was electric with anger and determination. Every conversation in the driveway, every whispered phone call, every nod exchanged over mailboxes carried the same question. When? When would we strike back? The answer came one chilly evening as we gathered in my garage. A dozen neighbors crammed between extension cords and half-finished circuits. Danny spread out a blueprint on the hood of my car. It was bold, it was insane, and it was exactly what we needed. We were going to light up Maplewood Drive all at once. Synchronized, unstoppable, undeniable. A great illumination that would make Gerald choke on his own hypocrisy. The plan was deceptively simple. Every house willing to participate would string up whatever decorations they had left, from glowing candy canes to blinking stars. Danny's system would tie them together wirelessly, synced to one master control. At the appointed moment, the entire block would light up in harmony, an explosion of color and sound so overwhelming that even Gerald's rage couldn't drown it out. It wouldn't just be rebellion. It would be spectacle. And it would send a message to anyone watching: joy was not optional. It was essential. Preparation was frantic and thrilling. Ladders clattered against roofs as people worked late into the night. The Johnsons scaled their garage with a professional ease that made the rest of us dizzy just watching. Mrs. Callahan, 80 years old and barely 5 feet tall, insisted on hanging snowflake lights along her gutters. Frank guarded his new army of reindeer like they were prized cattle. The Perez family turned their yard into a winter carnival, every bush and tree dripping with colored bulbs. For the first time in weeks, the street buzzed not with fear but with excitement. Felt like something bigger than Christmas. Felt like taking back our lives. Of course, Gerald was not blind. His curtains twitched constantly, his car cruised the block at odd hours, and his letters doubled in frequency. Each new notice threatened steeper fines, harsher punishments, legal action. He warned of liens against property, foreclosures, lawsuits that would drain us all. The threats worked on some. A few neighbors backed out, pulling down their lights in a panic. But for most, the threats only fueled our fire. We had already crossed the line. There was no turning back. The first sabotage hit just days before the event. Danny's equipment, stored in my garage, was ransacked. Wires were slashed, circuits smashed, laptops stolen. It was devastating. We stood staring at the wreckage, silence thick in the air. Danny kicked a broken circuit board across the floor, his face pale with fury. We all knew who had done it. Maybe Gerald himself, maybe one of his loyalists. Whoever it was, they had struck a blow that threatened the whole operation. For a moment, despair hovered over us like a dark cloud. But then Mrs. Callahan spoke. Her voice cracked but steady. She reminded us that lights were only wires and plastic. What mattered was the spirit behind them. We could rebuild. And we would. We worked harder than ever. Danny rallied his robotics friends, who showed up with spare parts and fresh determination. The Johnsons donated equipment from their landscaping business. Neighbors who had never touched a circuit before learned to solder, string, and sync. Coffee flowed like water, and laughter cut through exhaustion. The sabotage had tried to break us, but it only made us stronger. By the night before the event, the system was ready. Not perfect, not polished, but functional. And sometimes, functional is all you need for a miracle. The morning of the rebellion dawned crisp and bright. We moved like shadows, finalizing connections, checking bulbs, testing power sources. At noon, Gerald struck his last blow. A notice plastered across every door declared that anyone displaying outdoor lights would be fined immediately and reported to the authorities for non-compliance with community safety laws. It was a desperate move, a final attempt to crush us with fear. But by then, it was too late. The fuse had been lit. Fear had no hold left on us. As dusk settled, tension thickened. Families huddled inside their houses, waiting. Kids pressed noses to windows, wide-eyed with anticipation. My heart pounded as I stood in my living room, hand hovering over the master switch. Danny sat beside me, fingers twitching, his laptop screen glowing with code. Outside, the street was silent, dark, ordinary. It was the calm before the storm. I could almost feel Gerald pacing in his house, certain he had won, certain we had been cowed. The thought made me smile. At exactly 7 o'clock, I flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. My stomach dropped. Panic clawed at me. Then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from my lungs, the entire street erupted in light. Colors exploded across rooftops. Trees shimmered. Candy canes pulsed. Reindeer pranced. Santas inflated with majestic speed. Music blared, synchronized to the blinking lights, filling the air with carols so loud they rattled windows. Maplewood Drive transformed into a wonderland, brighter than Times Square, louder than a stadium concert. The sight was so overwhelming I laughed until tears blurred my eyes. Neighbors spilled onto lawns, cheering, clapping, hugging. Kids danced in the glow, faces lit with pure joy. Even those who had been too scared to participate stood gaping, all washing away regret. It was bigger than we had imagined, brighter than we had hoped. For the first time, our street felt alive in a way that no HOA decree could ever erase. It was a victory not just of lights but of spirit. But Gerald was not silent. His front door flew open, and he stormed into the chaos like a general charging a battlefield. His face was crimson, his voice hoarse as he shouted about violations, fines, police. He waved his arms wildly, demanding the lights be shut down. No one listened. His words were drowned out by music and laughter. The sight of his rage only fueled our celebration. The more he screamed, the louder we cheered. The more he threatened, the brighter the lights seemed to shine. And then came the twist none of us expected. Police cars turned the corner, lights flashing, sirens wailing. The music faltered, laughter stilled. For a moment, fear returned. Had Gerald actually called the cops on Christmas lights? The cars rolled to a stop, doors opening. But instead of ordering us to disperse, the officers stood staring, mouths open, faces softening into grins. One of them chuckled. Another pulled out a phone and started recording. They didn't shut us down. They joined the crowd, shaking hands, taking selfies with kids under glowing arches. Gerald's power crumbled in real time, his ultimate threat exposed as empty. That night, Maplewood Drive became legendary. Videos of the rebellion spread online, neighbors sharing clips with friends and family. Strangers drove by just to see the spectacle, their headlights joining the sea of color. Our rebellion wasn't just a neighborhood victory. It was a story, a message, that no one, not even a self-appointed dictator with a gavel, could snuff out joy when people stood together. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The war wasn't over, but we had won the battle. And oh, what a battle it was. The night after the rebellion felt like a victory parade, but the morning after was a storm. Gerald's fury knew no limits. He sent out letters by hand, not even waiting for the mail, each one thicker than the last, stuffed with threats of lawsuits, foreclosure, even criminal charges. He swore he had photographic evidence of every violator and promised financial ruin for anyone who dared defy him. People woke up to find envelopes taped to their doors, scarlet with rage. Some laughed, tossing them straight into the trash. Others trembled, fear gnawing at the edges of their joy. The rebellion had been spectacular, but Gerald wasn't finished. And if he couldn't break our spirit with rules, he would try to break us with fear of money. For a few days, tension gripped Maplewood Drive like frost that refused to melt. Neighbors whispered about hiring lawyers, about moving away, about whether the fight was worth the risk. Children begged parents to leave the lights on, unwilling to lose the magic they had just tasted. The lights stayed up, but a shadow hung over them. Each glowing strand felt like a dare, each inflatable Santa a target. The question was no longer whether we could resist. It was whether we could survive the retaliation. Then Danny struck gold. He had been digging deeper into Gerald's financial records, emboldened by the rebellion's success. One evening, he burst into my living room, laptop glowing in his hands, eyes wide with excitement. He had found more than discrepancies this time. He had found proof. Transfers of HOA funds into Gerald's personal account. Payments to shell companies tied to his brother-in-law. Even invoices for luxury items billed under community maintenance. It was fraud, plain and simple, so blatant it almost felt comical. The dictator of Maplewood Drive had been funding his lifestyle with our dues. We called a secret meeting that night. Every key player crammed into my garage, tension buzzing in the air. Danny showed the records on a projector line by line, number by number. Gasps filled the room as the scope of Gerald's corruption became clear. Thousands, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned away. While we argued over reindeer and candy canes, Gerald had been robbing us blind. The anger in the room shifted from fear to outrage. We weren't just fighting for lights anymore. We were fighting against theft, against betrayal. Suddenly, we had the weapon that could end this war once and for all. The next HOA meeting was Gerald's last stand. He strutted in with his usual arrogance, gavel in hand, tie knotted too tight, confident he could still scare us into submission. But this time, the room was different. Neighbors filled every chair, lined the walls, their faces set with grim determination. Sheila, the board member who had broken ranks before, sat at the front with a folder so thick it looked ready to burst. Gerald called the meeting to order, but his voice cracked under the weight of silence. He launched into his familiar tirade, accusing us of rebellion, demanding compliance, promising fines that would bury us. And then Sheila stood. Her voice was calm, steady, sharp as glass. She announced that serious allegations had been raised against the president and that she had obtained documentation to support them. She opened the folder and spread out the evidence for all to see. Gasps rippled across the room. Gerald sputtered, shouted denials, waved his arms. But the more he raged, the weaker he looked. The board members, once cowed by his threats, shifted in their seats, eyes downcast, unwilling to meet his gaze. The power dynamic had shifted. The emperor had no clothes, and everyone could see it. Frank rose and demanded a vote of no confidence. The room erupted in cheers, fists pumping, voices shouting in agreement. Gerald slammed his gavel until the head cracked, screaming that the vote was illegal, invalid, unconstitutional. But no one cared. Hands shot up, voices shouted louder, and the board, cornered by the will of the people, called for an official tally. The result was unanimous. Gerald Thompson was removed as president of the Maplewood Drive Homeowners Association. The hall shook with applause, laughter, even tears. Years of fear shattered in a single moment. But the fallout didn't stop there. Sheila announced the evidence would be turned over to the police. The crowd gasped again, this time with delight. Gerald's face drained of color. He stumbled back, his gavel slipping from his hand, clattering to the floor like the last symbol of his crumbling power. Neighbors jeered as he fled the hall, his threats hollow, his reign over. That night, Maplewood Drive erupted in celebration. Lights blazed brighter than ever. Music thundered through the street. Children danced under falling snow from machines Danny had rigged. It wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was freedom. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The board, newly restructured with Sheila at the helm, announced reforms. Transparency became the rule. Financial records were made public, meetings were open, and decisions were voted on fairly. Fines were reduced to reasonable amounts, applied only when necessary. The HOA wasn't abolished, but it was reborn. And most importantly, the Christmas light ban was gone forever. Maplewood Drive would never be dark again. The story of our rebellion spread beyond the block. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. Videos of the Great Illumination went viral, watched by millions. We became a symbol, a strange but powerful tale of ordinary people standing up to petty tyranny. Strangers mailed us decorations, companies donated lights, and tourists drove by just to see the infamous street that had fought for Christmas. For once, the spotlight was ours, and it wasn't going anywhere. As for Gerald, the last we heard, he was under investigation. Rumors swirled about frozen bank accounts, legal battles, even a divorce. No one on Maplewood Drive missed him. His house, once immaculate, stood empty, a hollow shell of control that had collapsed under its own weight. Sometimes I walked past it and felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered the darkness he tried to force on us, and pity turned to satisfaction. He had built his power on fear, and fear had no place here anymore. On Christmas Eve, the street reached its peak. Every house glowed, from the smallest porch bulb to the grandest display. Kids raced between yards, neighbors shared food and laughter. Music filled the air. I stood on my porch, cocoa in hand, watching it all with a heart so full it felt ready to burst. The rebellion had started with anger, but it ended with joy. Not just the joy of lights, but the joy of community, of people standing together against something bigger than themselves. That was the true victory. As midnight approached, Danny joined me on the porch, his face glowing in the kaleidoscope of colors. He grinned and said, "Not bad for a bunch of suburban rebels." I laughed, raising my mug in salute. He was right. We weren't just rebels. We were survivors. We were neighbors. And on Maplewood Drive, we were finally free.